Hello, and welcome to the Argyle CX UX Leadership Forum. My name is Eric Wallace with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our moderator. To ask a question during the session, simply type into the Q&A chat and we'll address your questions at the end of the session. Now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our moderator. Today we have Mike Catania, who is Director of Innovation at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. We are excited to have our panelists here for a discussion called People First CX UX, Making Brand Matter to Humans. Welcome, Mike and Andrew. Mike, over to you.
Thanks, Eric. I'm Mike Catania. As Eric just said, I'm the Director of Innovation based out of the Medical Center in Los Angeles for the Department of Veterans Affairs. But before joining the VA, I co-founded two venture-backed startups in e-commerce. I also teach at UCLA School of Management and the Catalyst program for healthcare biotechnology innovation at MIT. So with that, hand it over to our panelist today, Andrew Lindsay.
Thank you, Mike. Super excited to be here talking with you today. My name is Andrew Lindsay. I'm the head of enterprise design and user experience with Kraft Heinz. I've been here for just under a year and a half, building out the design practice from the ground up with the intention of accelerating our efforts around digital transformation and digital enablement throughout every part of the organization. Prior to Kraft Heinz, within the CPG industry, I have been involved across multiple industries, home services, telecommunications, and ed tech, building out teams in one form or another, primarily within the design space, but also across engineering and a creative. So I have always maintained a close pulse on the way that our products and services resonate at the customer and consumer level.
Excellent. Well, thanks for making the time to talk to us today. Since you do have such a diversity of experiences, I'd like to kind of kick things off talking about the construct of brand and what that matters kind of across industries. So just as a starting point to kind of think about like what brand could mean. It's something that customers are willing to pay a premium for that kind of goes beyond the value that they would get from the actual experience. Like, does that ring true to you for particular industries? Like, is that not really where brand is as you understand it? Like, is there, I guess, can you modify that in a way to make it more meaningful or more intelligible across industries?
Definitely. We're at an interesting point in time. Generally, we see consumers falling into two camps at the highest, most generic level. There's many different dimensions, but just to start the conversation off, brand loyalists and price cost loyalists, right? Some people are fully committed to a brand regardless of any extenuating factors generally. And then others are going to be looking at the bottom line and where a multitude of brands come in and actually wind up servicing them as individuals. For the brand loyalists, we wind up associating that mindset with deeper connection to personal identity, personal values, and personal intrinsic motivators that they embrace in one form or another. And so if brands can tap into that, it winds up creating a really strong and lasting partnership with individual consumers. At other times, regardless of what industry we're talking about, brands compete at the price points. And so as all of us are continuously looking at our own personal bottom lines at household and small and mid-sized businesses, it's important for us to be able to compete there as well, while also managing a message around other important factors like quality and values and sustainability and those types of things.
So it sounds like in this definition, the concept of brand is multifactorial. So you said that there's two buckets. You're either competing on brand, on a differentiated product, or you're competing on cost. So if I'm a company and I am looking to expand my market share on the brand, like, am I trying to compete by out-branding other companies or in pulling from that same bucket from different brands? Or am I trying to pull in new customers from cost or a little of both?
That's a great question. And at the end of the day, there's certainly no cookie cutter answer to it. It requires the brand and the teams responsible for being stewards of that brand to understand who their core demographics are. What are the things that matter the most to them and the people that they're appealing to and trying to create those meaningful relationships with. If a brand goes out and conducts research and listening, social listening, and just generally elevates their awareness and understanding of who those people are as individuals, maybe they walk away and say cost is the most important thing. That doesn't mean that we should be abandoning our core brand values and principles and identity for the purposes of just aggressively pushing cost at every channel we can, but still understanding that as a primary driving motivator, lean into that and highlight that as one of the differentiators that we bring to the table, either as at the top of the spectrum or at the bottom of the spectrum, because there's always a case to be made for brands sitting at either end of it. But again, that's certainly not the only audience out there. And so for others who are looking at more the values and principles end of things, again, it's just creating programs and establishing teams from within the brand to make sure that we can clearly and effectively understand and pulse out the conversations that are happening out in the world, how people are responding to different aspects of not only how our brand has pushed out, but also other competing brands within and across different industries.
So early in that, you said it's important to be a good steward of your brand, which says to me that there is a certain amount of time. Like when I think of stewardship, that's not just like we're going to do it right now. This is like a short-term win. So stewardship, I imagine on like a protracted timeline. So as you think about like, how can we become good stewards of our brand? Like what exactly does that mean? And what is the timeline associated with being able to prove that's true?
I love that question. It's one of the things that we talked about every single day when I was in the ad tech industry. And in order for us to strictly transactionally, in order for us to create the greatest customer lifetime value, we need to understand that these are long-term conversations that are taking place at many different dimensions. So we're speaking to people in as personalized a context as we can, and through deepening our understanding of what is driving them and their purchase decisions and purchase patterns and purchase behaviors. And if we just hone in on one dimension of that, the conversation will become too transactional. And that then becomes a reflection of our brand. And so instead of, and when I say our brand, of course, I'm speaking generically here, not necessarily from my positioning today in my current role. So how do we then create those longer, more sustained conversations? What does it look like and what channels are we tapping into? Because across the landscape, we obviously have many different ways through digital channels, through point of sale and point of purchase, and then also opportunities for direct one-on-one consumer engagement as well. But we have to make sure that those conversations are queued up and structured in a way that feels natural, feels like a natural extension of the brand, and genuine above and beyond anything else, because people are very quick to sniff out disingenuous sort of extensions of the brand in areas that it wouldn't otherwise naturally fall.
I believe all of that. I mean, to me, brand kind of feels, I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's like the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is right now. It's like trying to build things like, I don't want to say before you need them, but having a long-term vision of what you want the brand to be. So I guess as we think about like what the brand could be, like how do you measure success, particularly in the early stages? Like if we're saying, all right, we're going to do this. This is our 10-year strategic plan. We want to build the brand in this way. Like what activities should we be looking at versus what outcomes should we be looking at that are like the leading indicators that we are building our brand the right way?
Yeah, there's some interesting progress activity that's going on in this area, particularly within the tech industry right now. Recently, over the past couple of years, Google transitioning over to Alphabet Facebook transitioning into Meta, right? Both of these started with a broader ambition. We saw a natural extension of their portfolio in a way that was just under Google in the beginning and under Facebook in the beginning. And then as we started to see them connect the dots and draw a stronger narrative thread around how data drives search and how data is also driving all of the other products within their portfolio, same with Facebook, they began to realize that there was a much bigger ambition. I guess they had always realized that. They began to share with us insights into what that bigger ambition is. And as they went through that rebranding process, it became more evident and more clear. Like, it's not clearly defined yet, but the ambition now resonates above and beyond anything else. It feels very open-ended and it feels very ambitious, right? We don't know exactly what's to come. It is unpredictable, but in a way that's characteristic of each of those brands. And so while some, maybe the rebranding for Meta was a bit controversial and met with mixed emotions, I found it to be pretty brilliant in regards to how it signifies the longer term trajectory for where and how that company is looking to dominate across the tech landscape many years into the future. And similar with Alphabet, although Alphabet's particularly interesting because it's not just within tech, they're also expanding over into the medical sciences fields as well, and in other areas too.
I think brands moving into adjacent spaces as they open up new business lines is something that is absolutely booming right now. Like, you're no longer just one thing. You are now this platform for a bunch of different things.
Absolutely. I think about like what Amazon is doing with Amazon Health. And so how do they capitalize on their core brand values, which would be things like speed, personalization, quality, consistency, and stability at scale into the healthcare space, which has historically not really been associated with any of those things. That's a really interesting value proposition. Now, whether or not they get strong footing and momentum, despite some of the value prop that they bring to the table, TBD. It's still pretty early on in that whole venture, but I think it was a brilliant move on their part.
So while we're on this topic then, as companies move into adjacent spaces, that doing things that they're not necessarily known for, like, how do they know these movements are working? Like, when we think about like what is resonant, like, is this move, is this rebrand, is it resonating with customers? Like, how do you even know, particularly in the early stages, like, is this effective? Is that done in focus groups? Is that done in surveys? Are there other kind of lick your thumb, hold it up to the wind and see how things are going? Like, how do you get a sense for if these brand moves are working?
Yeah. Upfront research, I'm a huge advocate of it, right? So let's measure the marketplace and run some evaluations to determine if there's even a viable opportunity for us to play in these areas. Assuming that, the decision is, yes, let's move it forward. We have to make sure that from the very beginning, we're building in listening plans, right? And just listening in somewhat of a generic term, but how do we make sure that we can maintain a clear understanding of how all of the different activities within this new venture are resonating with across the consumer landscape? Digitally, we obviously can lean into things like insights and analytics. In social media, we can do social listening on a regular basis. And then also just seeing like what levels of engagement and responses are we achieving across all of the different channels that we're pushing out on. And we have to be agile and nimble in the early days, right? Like, if we go out with a very hard and fixed business model and value proposition and brand identity and statement, it's going to be hard for us to pivot if something doesn't hit the mark. Regardless of all of the due diligence and research that we've done, there's flexibility that we need to build in from day one through, say, the first 5 years to be able to meld to the responses that we're receiving from the marketplace. Just as much as we would build into the digital product development life cycle, right? Like, continuous optimization is not just a digital product construct. It has to be something that we're building into the design and development of our brands as well. And that's one of the more interesting areas that I'm particularly interested in seeing evolve just conversationally and intellectually over the next couple of years, because I think we're going to see a lot of brands emphasizing that in ways that we just haven't been positioned to do historically, because the landscape wasn't right for it. The mediums and channels weren't appropriate. And now I think we're going to see some really cool stuff.
Certainly. So for all of these responses, these are all very like data heavy requests, right? This is like first person or primary research, secondary research. We're taking indicators from the market, very data heavy. But earlier when we were talking about rebranding or brand expansion, that seemed to be more driven by the story as opposed to the data. So do you have a sense for like kind of like how you marry these two things together? Like where is the sweet spot for capturing the data and getting the insights you need from it to getting to the story that you want to tell, and making that how you get that story to market?
Definitely. Storytelling is something that has to be built deeply into any and every brand and product venture that we look to get out into an external audience, in front of an external audience, but an internal audience as well. Because that brand story, while it obviously in the context of our conversation has to resonate with our consumers, it also has to resonate with the internal workforce too, so that they understand what it is that we're bringing to the table, not just from a core features and functionality standpoint, but also in regards to how we think about and assess and evaluate product delivery and new product enhancements and evolutions. And product in the broadest sense of the term, we could be talking about digital products, physical products, food, beverage, anything. And again, that narrative is something that as we craft it, we listen, we understand, we learn what the response is, and then we pivot and we refine. There's a question in the chat about how AI impacts our ability to make brands matter to humans. And I think that's a great and critical question that we're still in the process of answering. But AI is going to help us evaluate and assess more rapidly in real time the way that individuals are responding to our brand and our narrative and our story, so that we can put better recommendations together in regards to what that pivot looks like, and how we can best continue the conversation.
It sounds like alignment is a key factor in success. Like you can't have a story like your strategic narratives over here and then your company over here. It has to be in sync. So as we think about like the internal culture versus like the external presentation of that, like is it possible to survive where the company inside the walls is not telling that same story? Like can it exist solely for the customer base?
Can it exist? Yes. I think we can find use cases where that's happened. We're telling one story to our consumers, and then internally it's completely different. Will it thrive? Will it remain persistent? Will it create deep connections with its consumers? I think it gets really challenging. That's one of the reasons why we see brands and companies focusing on things like brand values and principles, because we want to make sure that there is a correlation between how we operate and function internally and what that actually, how that materializes across the consumer landscape. If we have a diehard, cutthroat, backstabbing culture in company A, but we're trying to push out products that are, happy-go-lucky, feel good, make your life better, easier, and softer, it's going to run in conflict. And the way that we operate internally is going to be difficult for us to pursue messaging that correlates with our external brand identity. If there is harmony between those two environments, then we can start to create economies of scale. People and teams are going to be resonating in just the way that we have our and manage our internal conversations, so that it's just a more natural bridge to the external audiences.
That is very helpful. Thanks for the clarification on that. So since we're getting a lot of questions about CX, let's take a slight pivot into UX and CX. So the heart of that is like understanding the customer experience, right? Like that's going to mean different things to different people. But fundamentally, your customers are trying to do a job and you are being hired to do it. So part of that is understanding what problems they need solved. And this can be accomplished a bunch of different ways. But we've been talking very strategically about how to go about brand. So as we narrow the scope and talk more tactically, like how do I figure out what problems my customers even need solved?
Yep, I love it. And I think this builds well into the last question that was posted in regards to like understanding that, but also helping to elevate that visibility and awareness to the senior leadership teams as well. There's a strong element to go back to our previous topic around storytelling here. First, we have to understand who those users are. And again, the mechanisms that we talked about earlier are all tried and true. At times, if we can, just boots on the ground, talk with people as individuals and begin to create a strong base of knowledge in regards to the different challenges and problems that people are facing, whether it's within the construct of a specific brand or product or for net new design and development. But taking that back to our executive teams has to be presented through the lens first of business proposition and this is from my own personal successes and recommendations, right? Business value and proposition, so that we can help drive the message of viable opportunity area, and then backing into the way that this actually winds up impacting the external consumer landscape. There are storytelling frameworks out there that have been that people swear by, but also just leaning into your own personal understandings of, you know, how and what you're hearing from the individuals that you're speaking with. What are some of the words that continue to come to the fore? What are the general themes that you're picking up on that are persistent across all of the different individuals and user groups and demographics that you're amassing insights from? And how do those culminate into a consistent and linear narrative story that can also more importantly be equated down to a viable business opportunity? Then when we have it tied back to the business opportunity and ultimately the bottom line, that's when I've found executive leadership to be most receptive. And we have a much easier time with the conversation as opposed to leading with emotion-based marketplace evaluation.
All right. So let's say I wanted to do that. So I have just sat down with a bunch of my customers, you know, done some user workflows with them, and now I understand thematically what their problems are. So now I have, these, let's just say 4 broad buckets of their pain. Like, how do I take that and synthesize that into the business opportunity for executives? Like, what is in this black box that kind of takes it from, starting point A, we have very qualitative feedback, maybe some quantitative feedback from those same, research missions. And now it is a deck going before executive leadership. Like, what happens in this space?
Totally. Actually, I think there's a couple of steps between. So we have our research, then we have the presentation. But after we're done with the research, it's just the starting point, right? Because we have to continue to distill down our learnings in a way that is as actionable as possible. So we go through even just using a simple construct like the 5 whys framework, right? Where you continue to ask the question, why is this a problem? Why do we need to provide a solution here? Why is this an opportunity area? And as we continue to back in, you get to the raw essence of what that actually is, so that we're closer to what the solution would ultimately be and how that presents and resonates with our consumers. And that as a starting point, so that we're not going with too much of a prescribed point of entry, but saying, look, here's our opportunity area. Here's how we're going to now back into the solutioning space, is usually one which resonates really well, because we're going to start off with saying we need a capital investment here so that we can make sure that we're creating the right solution for the right people at the right points in their lives. But in order to do that, at the right points in their lives, in order to make sure that we're achieving product market fit with as little thrash as possible. But in order for us to do that, we have to take the due diligence to maintain that conversation and communication with them and understand how we're resonating with that audience or set of audiences as individuals.
So I won't speak for anyone else, but working for the federal government right now, there is almost certainly pushback. If I say like, I want, I need $50 million to test this thing, to potentially bring something to market, that is simply too big of a bite to take off. So I would imagine there are ways to demonstrate efficacy through a testing, through experimentation, through assumption challenging. Do you have any guidance for like how you make this more digestible to executive leadership, so it's not, we need $100 million for this, we need $10 million, we need whatever we need?
Yep, 100%. And one of the things that I generally include in all of the proposals that we would bring in front of executive teams would be current state versus proposed or future state. And so it's simple exercise, right? Understand the current landscape, all of the different pain points that are associated with that, cost that's being the cost that's associated with that, steps and stages and people and processes and workflows, all of those types of things, right? Depending on the problem and challenge area that we're looking at, some of those more than others. But then looking then at the proposed or future state, it's really easy to create a side-by-side comparison. We're currently spending $100 million in this area to deliver these services in a way that has, X number of inefficiencies. And as a result, we're losing out on a market potential of X number of millions of dollars. Boom, easy. And here's our proposal. We have the potential to benefit not just from that delta, but also 10xing that by streamlining in these areas and delivering this service to these people. It becomes a very binary sort of open and shut case, right? It's never that easy, but it makes it a much easier point of entry into advancing that proposal to the next stage. But in order for us to do that, we have to effectively conduct that upfront research that we were talking about earlier, so that we can come prepared with all of the right talking points to support that current state understanding.
So it sounds like you're saying that good CX is good business, like the business case is there for doing it. Since you have worked in a lot of different sectors, I know this is not going to be a fun question to answer, but if you had to choose, like which side of the bucket is more effective? Like, are we solving for inefficiencies or are we expanding the market? So basically what I'm asking is, what has, in your experience, been more resonant with executive leadership? Like, we're expanding top line revenue by pursuing this, or we are implementing cost savings through this? Like, does one side seem to win out in the story?
What I've seen, not necessarily in my personal roles, but just evaluating the landscape, is that businesses have a tendency to first look at their internal efficiencies and operations and see how we can harden up in that realm, because it's generally really difficult to go out and create a new product that has a viable long-term presence within the marketplace. And that's a natural response mechanism, right? Innovation is hard. Testing is hard. Responding to feedback in the real world is doubly hard. And so if we can leverage new services and technologies and workflow management tools and things like that through digital transformation efforts, awesome. We should be continuously doing that year over year as part of our core DNA. So that should be just on, that cycle should be turned on continuously. And what that does is that frees us up to focus our teams on more important and strategic areas like innovation, whether that's a product innovation or digital innovation or workforce innovation or whatever it is, so that who we are as an enterprise now fundamentally changes into a company that's focused on innovation instead of keep the lights on with tried and true products. And again, I'm speaking very generally here, not as a representative of current or previous roles, but the way that I've seen certain companies thrive within their industries has generally been based off of those types of approaches. And that's one of the reasons why we see so many companies trying to find ways to embrace digital transformation efforts right now. Many companies fail in that effort, though, because it is very difficult and it requires guts and courage to persist through some of the less exciting phases of what successful digital transformation looks like. And so as we see the reasons for companies stalling out, often it's because they're not necessarily investing in the technologies that are required to achieve success, or upskilling their workforces in order to make sure that our people are continuing to facilitate the digital transformation journey, and any number of other reasons. So another important element and aspect of all of this is back to storytelling, making sure that we have visibility and awareness across all of those risks, understanding what the potential threats are to success within this longer journey, because it's not going to happen overnight, and then creating plans for how we address and thrive and succeed across each of those stages.
So when you were talking about guts and courage for this, to me that says, in order to even get to that place, you need to be asking the tough questions. So what I'd really like to know is what are the questions that we should be asking when we think about like our companies as a brand, CX, like what, this call ends. What are the questions that I need to be asking of myself, of my team, of executive leadership, of whoever to start the ball rolling? Because the easiest thing to do is to kind of keep going, be like, hey, this is pretty good, and not even ask like, what is the cost of doing things the exact same way?
I love it. Love that question. First, starting from very baseline, where are we at today? How are we operating? And what are we missing out on? That's our North Star. That has to change and evolve as we make progress, but we have to make sure that we're continuously measuring ourselves against that current understanding. And as we go forth and put our plans together, it's with the intention of improving that in one form or another. So now we have the ability to create that connective thread between current and future state with all of the individual milestones and deliverables and objectives clearly outlined and defined, so that as we get into those tougher conversations and those moments that are maybe a little bit unpleasant, we can cross-reference that against that roadmap or that visioning and say like, actually, we knew we were going to experience thrash roughly around this time. We're right on point, because once we turn that corner, here's what we're going to be expecting to achieve. Storytelling at the executive level in those areas is as critically important as storytelling from a brand across the consumer landscape.
To me, that is like the big takeaway from this is really you have to lock down what is the story that you want to tell. How do you make it consistent? And how does that align with your future goals? So I guess with that, we will dive into some of these questions. So this is the first one I have up. It just says, what is the biggest mistake you've seen companies make in trying to differentiate their brands? And how did they get past it?
I think, generally speaking, when we see brands try to extend beyond the essence of who they are and what value and message they're bringing to the marketplace in a way that overextends in too short a period of time, brands will evolve. They have to evolve in order to survive for a long period. But if we jump right into the deep end without introducing some of those changes and listening to how those changes are received, it's going to create thrash with their loyalists. And we've seen that play out in a number of ways, not just within the consumer landscape, but also across the political landscape. Mike, I'm sure you've got a ton of stories in regards to how you've seen that happen in your part of the world. But more, the essence of the question is phase it out. introduce those evolutions to the brand story in small, measured, and deliberate ways so that the marketplace can consume it and see that as a natural part of the evolution and not just a knee-jerk reaction. And usually what we see is success and lasting relationships, brand
So
relationships.
if I've done it wrong, I've done all of this wrong, I tried to move too fast, and now I am a restaurant that serves 4 different cuisines, and I've lost everyone because I've overgrown. Like, how do I rein that back in? Like, I've overexpanded my brand. Like, how do I guess is an even better question. Can I get those loyalists back? Like, what do I do?
Getting the loyalists back is always TBD. Sometimes people feel personally offended by it. Domino's is a great case study for how to address these things, right? Over the past 10 years or so, they ran a ton of market research and realized that their reputation was pretty bad. People thought there was just cheese on cardboard pizza, and there was not a whole lot else that they had to work with there. And so they came out and they said, we get it. Our pizza was not good. We're going to own that, and we're going to respond to it. And so they created this new dialogue with their consumers that was pretty unprecedented for the time. And this is recent. This is over the past 10 years. I'm sure you remember the campaigns, but it was brilliant in how they assumed ownership over their greatest weaknesses, instead of which were far outnumbering the strengths that brand had, and turned that into a tremendous success story. Because now they've largely shed the impression that, you know, they're sort of the low subgrade option in regards to delivery pizza, and did a remarkable brand transformation as a result of it. So really, at the end of the day, it's like, understand where you sit in the broader context of, you know, people's perceptions. And if you have the opportunity to lean into that, own it, and have genuine conversations with your consumers, because people are pretty quick to pick up on disingenuous attempts at like, hey, no, we're also this or we're also that. Own it and be transparent with your intentions as to why you want to change as a brand.
Just like with personal relationships, ownership.
Absolutely.
Extreme ownership.
I love that.
All right, we're going to take a very hard pivot to question 4 in the chat. There have been a lot of layoffs in CX and UX professionals over the past 6 months. Do you have any advice for the recently laid off? So as an addendum to that, this seems to be a space where people feel like if they have done anything adjacent to it, they can credibly assert themselves as a professional in this space, when really that's not the case. So we've seen a lot of points in the data bucket. We've seen a lot of points in the storytelling bucket. So as you're looking for, you know, your next opportunity, like, what is the right story to tell, and what are the right metrics of success to convey that say you belong in this space and can lead in it?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for to the individual who put that in the chat. One of the things that I lean into the most when building my teams, when interviewing candidates, when upskilling the people within and across the org, is making sure that we have a clear understanding of the business value that's being delivered by practices that aren't historically directly associated with that. In the absence of CX and UX professionals, we run a very high risk of delivering products and services that miss the mark entirely. And so for us to be able to easily equate that with clearly defined and quantifiable business value should be deeply ingrained into our DNA as individual practitioners within this space. Learn the language, think about what a boardroom looks like in the company that you're in or applying to or thinking about applying to, and just the terminology and the areas of emphasis that they're focusing on as it relates to the general management and sustainability of the business. Now leverage that within the way that you talk about your craft, the deliverables and value that you've brought in previous roles, and how you're going to accelerate the value within the team that you are interested in being a part of. A strategic business partner first, and a creative UX CX practitioner second. When we invert that paradigm, I've never found a moment where it hasn't created surprise and delight for the people who are on the receiving end of that conversation, because it opens up an entirely new world of possibility for them as they're looking at you as a new strategic partner.
So it sounds like it is that marriage of these are the actions I took, and here are the outcomes from it. So if you are particularly early stage in your career, let's say you are not privy to the business outcomes, like you do not know nor have access to increases in top line revenue. You only really have like the quintessential core user experience numbers. Like, is there still value in that? And if so, like how would I want to prioritize? Here are the things that I think are going to impress a potential employer.
Absolutely. So in early stage, you're right. There might not be that level of comfort and familiarity with executive business and problem framing. However, as we think about it, again, back full circle to the first part of our conversation, leaning into these roles as the disciplines who are going to help us unlock a deeper understanding around the consumers and the audiences and the individuals that we're ultimately providing solutions and services to. That's where we start to create a deeper level of value that is distinct from any of the other business functions who would otherwise be involved in these efforts. And that's an inherent skill that we bring to the table, regardless of how much time or effort, time or experience we have within our industry, because research and understanding and human-centered design and solutioning processes are one of the core tenets of CX and UX.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, the business case for CX has always been there. And again, it's always been a matter of storytelling. Like, can you bring, the quant and the qual together to get to that story? So I guess in closing, just a broader landscape question. How do you anticipate CX technology is going to evolve over the next couple of years? So as an extension to that, I would simply say, how are we going to, is our perception of how we measure brand going to change? Are the tools going to change? What types of changes would there be in like the leading indicators for how we measure brand? Like what, 5 years from now when we have the redo of this, like what are we going to be talking about?
Well, it would be a bold move to speculate what anything looks like 5 years from now, but I love the question. And I'll just say measurement is going to take on an entirely different lens and goes back to the question that was posted earlier about the role that AI plays in all of this as well. It's hard to determine exactly how that looks and feels and comes to life, but we're already seeing successful use cases in areas where brands are leveraging AI to more rapidly test and respond to perceptions and changing interests within the marketplace. So that allows us to move faster. We're seeing use cases where brands are leveraging AI to more effectively measure and analyze the impact that their products are delivering at the consumer levels, how products are being manufactured and sourced and phased through all different stages of the supply chain, and really every aspect of the brand and product experience. And so these technologies are going to be changing on a fairly rapid basis, but the brands who are capable of embracing them in a controlled and safe and responsible manner early on in this new venture that we're entering into in the age of generative AI are likely going to be the ones who are most well positioned to thrive longer term. And that's where we go back to the digital transformation efforts as well. We have to have a clearly defined plan that will take us through all of the different stages of digital transformation so we can be at the leading edge of all of these new capabilities in tech, so that we're creating brands that last and resonate to the consumers for the long term.
That's perfect. Thanks for answering what I acknowledge to be an impossible question, for sure. So I think that is going to wrap it up for us today. Thank you so much, Andrew, for making the time to do this. Like I certainly learned a lot from your expertise, and hopefully our audience did as well. And with that, we will hand it back to Eric.
Thank you so much, Mike. It was great talking with you.
You too.
Thank you, Andrew and Mike, for that insightful discussion. And I want to thank everyone in the audience for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. Thank you.